I showed up to the blind date intentionally plain, oversized clothes, hair tied back, no makeup. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just a tired nurse who wanted the night to end. But the moment I stepped into that private restaurant, the kind only billionaires reserve, the CEO sitting there froze like the world had stopped breathing. His eyes widened, not at how I looked, but at who he thought I was. I didn't recognize him. I couldn't. But as I stood there, ready to walk away, he whispered a name no one has spoken to me since childhood. My real name. Tell me which country you're watching from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. Now let me tell you how I ended up in that impossible moment. Let me go back to the beginning, to the version of myself I tried so hard to bury. My name used to be Lily Smith. That was before I changed it legally, before I erased every trace of the girl who grew up in the kind of poverty that makes you invisible. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families in the Philadelphia suburbs. I remember waiting in kitchen doorways while she scrubbed floors, trying to make myself small, trying not to exist too loudly in spaces that weren't meant for people like us. The Hayes estate was one of her regular clients. We lived in what they called the kitchen house, a small structure behind the main mansion where the live-in staff stayed. It was drafty in winter, sweltering in summer, but it was ours. My mother would wake at 5 a.m. to prepare breakfast for the family, work until 10 p.m. cleaning and cooking, and still find time to help me with homework at the tiny table in our room. I was 8 when I first met Alex. He'd wandered into the kitchen one afternoon, a small boy with dark hair and eyes that looked too serious for a child. The main house felt like a museum, he told me. Cold and quiet and full of things you weren't allowed to touch. So he'd come looking for somewhere that felt alive. We became inseparable after that. He'd sneak out to the kitchen house after his tutoring sessions. We'd do homework together, play games in the small park nearby, talk about everything and nothing. He told me about the pressure of being a Hayes, the expectations that felt like they were crushing him. I told him about the fear of not having enough, of watching my mother work herself sick trying to keep us afloat. For 2 years, we had something rare. A friendship built on nothing but genuine connection. He didn't see the poor girl whose mother cleaned his house. I didn't see the rich boy who'd inherit millions. We just saw each other. When I was 10 years old, everything changed. Mrs. Hayes caught us having dinner together in the kitchen, Alex laughing at something I'd said, completely at ease in a way he never was in the formal dining room. She looked at us like we'd committed a crime. That night, my mother was fired. We had 3 days to vacate the kitchen house. My mother never told me the real reason we left. She said Mrs. Hayes needed to cut costs, that we'd find something better. But I heard the whispers from the other staff. The Hayes boy was spending too much time with inappropriate company. It was bad for his development. He needed to associate with people of his own class. We moved to a rundown apartment in North Philadelphia. My mother found work cleaning office buildings at night. The pay was worse, the hours longer, the work harder. I watched her age 5 years in the span of 1. When I was 12, she got sick. It started as a cough she couldn't shake. Then came the fatigue, the weight loss, the pain she tried to hide. By the time we got her to a free clinic, the cancer was already advanced. Stage 4. Inoperable. The doctor said she might have 6 months. She lasted 2 years through sheer stubbornness. She kept working until she physically couldn't anymore. We lost the apartment. Moved to a room in a boarding house that smelled like mold and defeat. I started working at 14, lying about my age to get shifts at a fast food restaurant. I'd come home from school, work a 4-hour shift, then spend the night taking care of my mother. Helping her to the bathroom, managing her pain medication, watching her disappear piece by piece. She'd tell me stories about her childhood, about my father who'd left before I could walk, about dreams she'd had that never came true. She died 3 weeks after my 18th birthday, I was holding her hand in a hospital charity ward, surrounded by beeping machines and the smell of disinfectant. Her last words to me were, "Be more than I was. Don't let this life make you small." I buried her with money I didn't have, borrowed from a loan shark who charged interest that would take me years to pay off. I stood at her grave alone because there was no one else to come. No family who cared, no friends who had time, no one who'd noticed that a woman had worked herself to death trying to survive. That's when I changed my name. Lily Smith became Lily Morgan. Morgan was my mother's maiden name, the only piece of her I wanted to keep. Smith connected me to a father who'd left before I could remember his face, to relatives who'd made it clear that a burden was all I'd ever be. So I buried Lily Smith, finished nursing school through loans I'm still paying off, and built a life where I was competent, reliable, and completely alone. I chose nursing because I remembered what it felt like to watch someone suffer and feel powerless to help. I wanted to be the person who could do something, who could make a difference even when the system failed. Every patient I saved felt like an apology to my mother for not being able to save her. My best friend Emma was the only person who knew my real story. She was a physician assistant at Philadelphia General Hospital, where I worked the night shift. Emma was the kind of person who believed everyone deserved love, second chances, happiness. I was the kind of person who'd stopped believing in fairy tales around the same time I'd started paying rent. That's why I was furious when she told me she'd set me up on a blind date. I was in the middle of a 16-hour shift, 3 patients coding simultaneously, running on coffee and spite. Emma cornered me in the break room at 2 a.m. She said, "He's a friend of my cousin. He's successful. He's kind. Just one dinner, Lily. You deserve something good." I told her I'd go only if she promised to never set me up again. I told her I'd make sure the date was a disaster so complete he'd never want to see me again. She laughed like she thought I was joking. I wasn't. I showed up in my oversized hoodie, the one with coffee stains and a hole in the sleeve. I wore my scrub pants because they were comfortable and I genuinely didn't care. My hair was in the same messy bun I'd worn during my shift. No makeup, no jewelry, no effort. I looked exactly like what I was, a nurse who'd worked 70 hours that week and wanted to go home and sleep for 3 days straight. Emma had given me the address. Rousseau, one of those restaurants in downtown Philadelphia that doesn't have prices on the menu because if you need to ask, you can't afford to eat there. I almost turned around the moment I saw the entrance. All marble and gold fixtures and a doorman in a better suit than anything I owned. But I'd promised Emma one date. So I walked in, ready to sit through 30 minutes of awkward conversation before claiming exhaustion and leaving. The hostess looked at me like I'd wandered in from the street, which technically I had. She asked if I had a reservation. I gave her the name Emma had told me. Alexander Hayes. Her entire demeanor changed. She became obsequious, nervous, leading me through the restaurant to a private room in the back. The kind of room with its own entrance, its own waitstaff, the kind of privacy that costs more than my monthly salary. That's when I realized Emma's successful friend wasn't just successful. He was the kind of wealthy that makes normal people uncomfortable. The door opened into a space that was more living room than dining room. Soft lighting and a single table set for 2. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Philadelphia skyline, the city lights twinkling like stars brought down to earth. Crystal chandeliers cast warm pools of light across dark wood floors. The table was set with china so delicate, it looked like it would shatter if you breathed on it too hard. A single white orchid sat in the center, elegant and expensive. And there he was, standing by the window with his back to me, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car. His shoulders were broad, his posture perfect, the stance of someone who'd been trained from birth to command rooms. Even from behind, he radiated wealth and power. He turned around. And the world stopped. I watched his face drain of color, the blood literally leaving his skin until he looked pale as death. His eyes widened, pupils dilating so fast I could see it happen. His breath caught visibly, his chest freezing mid-inhale like someone had punched all the air from his lungs. He stared at me like he'd seen a ghost, like I was something impossible made real, like I'd stepped out of a dream he'd been having for years. His hand, which had been holding a glass of wine, started shaking so badly I thought he'd drop it. The wine sloshed against the sides of the glass. He set it down quickly on the windowsill, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. This man who looked like he'd never been uncertain about anything in his life was falling apart in front of me. I froze in the doorway, my hand still on the door handle. This wasn't the reaction I'd expected. This wasn't polite disappointment or badly hidden judgment at my appearance. This wasn't even surprise. This was shock. Visceral, overwhelming shock. Recognition. Something that looked dangerously close to desperate hope. His mouth opened like he was going to say something, then closed again. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, then released. He was physically restraining himself from something, fighting some impulse I couldn't name. He took a step toward me and stopped himself forcibly. His jaw clenched. His entire body was vibrating with tension, coiled like a spring wound too tight. His voice when he spoke was rough, barely controlled, like every word was being dragged out of him. "You came." 2 words that somehow held the weight of years. Like he'd been expecting me not to. Like my presence here, in this room, was a miracle he didn't dare believe in. Like he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life, and now that it was here, he didn't know what to do with it. I almost left right then. Every instinct I had was screaming danger, warning me that this was too much, too intense, too something I couldn't name. There was something too raw in the way he was looking at me, something that made my skin feel too tight and my heart beat too fast. But then he did something unexpected. He took a visible breath, squared his shoulders, and smiled. It wasn't the polished smile of a CEO. It was soft and broken and real, reaching his eyes in a way that made him look younger, vulnerable. Like the mask had slipped and I was seeing the real person underneath. "I'm Alexander," he said, his voice still rough but steadier now. "Thank you for agreeing to dinner. I know Emma probably had to convince you. I'm grateful you gave me a chance." The formality of the words didn't match the emotion still naked on his face. I should have recognized something in that moment. The shape of his face, the way he held himself, something. But I was too focused on wanting to leave, too busy building walls, too determined to make this night end quickly. We sat down. He couldn't stop looking at me. Not at my clothes or my hair or my complete lack of effort. He looked at me like he was memorizing my face, like he was trying to solve a puzzle only he could see. The waiter brought menus. Alexander ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted. Normally that would have annoyed me, but he ordered simply the kind of meal someone orders when they're not trying to impress, when food is just fuel. Pasta, salad, water. Nothing extravagant. I asked him what he did. He said he ran a company. I asked what kind of company. He said acquisitions and development, real estate, some tech investments. The way he said it was casual, dismissive, like his job wasn't the most interesting thing about him. I told him I was a nurse. He leaned forward immediately, suddenly focused. "Where do you work?" "Philadelphia General Hospital," I said. "Night shift, ER." He absorbed that information like it mattered, like it was a clue to something important. Then he asked the question that made my stomach drop. "Have you always lived in Philadelphia?" I hesitated. The truth was complicated. I'd lived here as a child, left for 2 years when I was 10, came back at 16. But explaining that meant explaining things I didn't talk about, so I lied, more or less. He watched me lie. I could see it in his eyes. He knew I was hiding something, but instead of pushing, he just nodded slowly. His hand on the table was close enough to mine that I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. We ate in near silence. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, electric, like we were both waiting for something neither of us could name. Every time I glanced up, he was watching me. Not in a creepy way. In a way that made me feel seen for the first time in years. At one point, I reached for my water glass. My sleeve rode up slightly, exposing a small scar on my inner wrist. It was old, barely visible, shaped like a crescent moon. I'd gotten it as a child, falling off a swing and catching my arm on the metal chain. Alexander's eyes locked onto that scar. His breathing stopped completely. I watched his pupils dilate, his hand trembling as it moved involuntarily toward mine, before he caught himself and pulled back. He stared at that tiny mark like it held the secrets of the universe, like it was confirming something he'd been desperate to know, but terrified to believe. His reaction sent alarm bells ringing in my head. It was too intense, too specific. Nobody noticed that scar. It was a faint silver line less than an inch long. But he was staring at it like it was a neon sign. I pulled my sleeve down quickly, suddenly self-conscious. "Are you okay?" I asked. He looked away, but his jaw was tight, his hands clenched on the table. His knuckles were white. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough. "You have a scar. On your wrist." It reminded me of someone. "Someone you knew?" I asked carefully. He swallowed hard. "A long time ago. Someone important." He didn't elaborate. But I could see the war happening behind his eyes. Some internal struggle about what to say and what to keep hidden. It made me uneasy. This intensity from a stranger. But it also made me curious. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. He asked careful questions about my work, where I grew up, what I did in my free time. I gave careful answers, keeping things vague. He asked if I'd always lived in Philadelphia. I told him more or less, which was true but incomplete. I'd left for 2 years as a child, came back at 16 after my mother lost her job at the Hayes estate, but I didn't tell him that part. I should have said no. I should have gone home. But there was something about the way he asked, hopeful and terrified at the same time, that made me say yes. We walked through downtown Philadelphia, past the lit buildings and quiet streets. It was nearly 10 p.m. on a weeknight, the sidewalks mostly empty except for the occasional couple heading home from dinner or a businessman rushing to catch the last train. The air smelled like exhaust and street food and that indefinable city scent that was somehow comforting in its familiarity. He kept a respectful distance, never touching me, but I was hyper-aware of him beside me. He was tall, at least 6'2", broad-shouldered in a way that suggested he worked out regularly but not obsessively. The kind of physically present that made me feel small in a way that wasn't entirely unpleasant. More protected than diminished. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, making everything look like a noir film. Every few minutes I glanced at him, trying to figure out what was happening here. This didn't feel like a first date. It felt like something else entirely. Like he was memorizing me, cataloging every detail like he was afraid I'd disappear if he looked away for too long. We passed City Hall, its tower lit up against the night sky. A street musician was packing up his guitar, the last few notes of some sad song lingering in the air. Alexander pulled out his wallet and dropped what looked like $100 bill in the man's case without breaking stride. The musician called out thanks, shocked, but Alexander just nodded and kept walking. He asked me about nursing, about my shifts, about what I did when I wasn't working. I found myself talking more than I'd intended, the words coming easier than they should with a stranger. I told him about the chaos of the The impossible choices we had to make daily with lives hanging in the balance. About the patient last week who'd come in with chest pain and coded 3 times before we finally got him stable, and how I'd gone home and cried in the shower because I'd been so sure we were going to lose him. About the little girl who'd been in a car accident and held my hand the entire time we stitched up the gash on her forehead, and how she'd looked at me with these huge brown eyes and said, "You have nice hands," like it was the most important observation in the world. About how some patients stayed with you long after their charts were closed, how their faces haunted you during the rare moments of quiet. How you learned to carry that weight because the alternative was becoming numb, and numb meant you couldn't do the job anymore. He listened like every word mattered, his attention so complete it was almost overwhelming. Most people's eyes glazed over when I talked about work. They nodded politely and changed the subject to something less depressing. But Alexander leaned in, asked follow-up questions, wanted to understand the weight of what I carried every single day. When I mentioned being tired, he asked if I was sleeping enough. When I mentioned a difficult case, he asked how I coped with the emotional toll. It was unsettling, being seen this clearly by someone I just met. We were passing a small flower shop, closed for the night, when he stopped suddenly and looked in the window. They had sunflowers on display, bright yellow even in the dim light, arranged in cheerful bunches that seemed to glow. "Those are beautiful," he said quietly, his voice holding something I couldn't identify. "Do you like sunflowers?" "I used to," I said without thinking, the words automatic. "When I was a kid, they were my favorite. My mom used to say they looked like happiness, like if the sun decided to grow roots." Something flickered across his face, there and gone so fast I almost missed it. Grief, maybe, or recognition. Past tense, he asked carefully, "What changed?" I shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable with where this was going. Nothing specific. I don't think about flowers much anymore. Too busy surviving to notice things like that. Too busy working 70-hour weeks and trying to make rent and paying off student loans that never seemed to get smaller. "That's sad," he said, and his voice held genuine grief that seemed disproportionate to the conversation. Everyone should have time to notice beautiful things. Everyone should have space in their life for something as simple as sunflowers. We kept walking, his words hanging between us. He asked me about my childhood next, careful and probing like he was testing ice to see if it would hold his weight. I deflected most of it, giving him the sanitized version that didn't hurt to tell. Grew up poor, moved around a lot, my mom worked multiple jobs. Nothing about the Hayes estate, nothing about the kitchen house, nothing about the boy I'd known named Alex who'd shared his lunch with me and made me feel like I mattered. And then he said it. The thing that made my blood run cold. We were talking about the EE again, about how I handled the stress, the constant exposure to trauma. I was explaining that you build walls, you compartmentalize, you focus on the task at hand and deal with the emotions later. "You care so much about people who are suffering," he said. "You always did." I stopped walking. The words hung in the air between us. "Always. Not it seems like you do. Not I can tell you do. Always." Like he knew me. Like we had history. He realized his mistake immediately. His face went carefully blank, but I'd seen the flash of panic in his eyes. "What did you say?" I asked slowly. He cleared his throat. "I meant, it's clear from how you talk about your work that you've always been compassionate, that it's a core part of who you are." It was a smooth recovery, delivered with the confidence of someone used to boardrooms and negotiations. but I'd heard what I'd heard. And the way he'd said it, there was familiarity there. Certainty. "Do I know you?" I asked directly. "From before tonight?" "No," he said. But the answer came a half-second too late. That tiny hesitation told me everything. "I don't think you're telling me the truth," I said. I really looked at him for the first time, trying to find something familiar in his face. But I couldn't. He was a stranger. Wasn't he? We reached my car. A 10-year-old sedan that looked even more pathetic parked next to the luxury vehicles lining the street. I expected him to comment, to judge. He didn't. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at me like he was trying to memorize this moment. "Thank you for tonight," he said quietly. "I know you didn't want to come. I know Emma probably had to convince you. But I'm grateful you did." "How do you know Emma convinced me?" I asked. He smiled, sad and knowing. "Because someone like you doesn't need blind dates. You're the kind of person people search for their entire lives." It was the strangest compliment I'd ever received. I didn't know what to say. So I just nodded, got in my car, and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I watched him stand there until I turned the corner, not moving, just watching me go. I went home to my tiny studio apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots were background noise. I took a shower, crawled into bed, and tried to forget the way Alexander Hayes had looked at me, like I was something precious he'd lost and found again. I told myself it was one date. One strange, intense, confusing date. It didn't mean anything. I'd never see him again. I was wrong. 3 days later, I was working another night shift when Emma found me during my break. She was grinning like she'd won the lottery. "So, Alexander," she started. I cut her off. It was fine. He was nice. "It's not going anywhere." Emma's grin faltered. "He asked about you. He wanted to know if you'd be willing to see him again." I told her no. I told her I didn't have time for dating, for complications, for men who looked at me like I was a mystery they needed to solve. Emma looked disappointed but didn't push. 2 days after that, flowers arrived at the hospital. Not roses, sunflowers. Bright, simple, unpretentious. The card said, "Thank you for the walk." No pressure for more. Just gratitude for what was. I stared at those sunflowers for a full minute. Sunflowers had been my favorite as a child. I hadn't told anyone that in years. It was probably coincidence. It had to be coincidence. I threw the card away and put the sunflowers in the break room. A week later, I was leaving the hospital after a particularly brutal shift. A stabbing victim who didn't make it. A child with injuries that made me want to break things. The kind of night that reminded me why I usually worked on autopilot. I was walking to my car when I saw him. Alexander Hayes, leaning against a black town car, looking exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. He straightened when he saw me, and for a moment we just stared at each other across the parking lot. "I'm not stalking you," he said immediately. "I know how this looks. I wanted to make sure you were okay." I crossed my arms. "Why wouldn't I be okay?" "Emma mentioned you had a hard shift." He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncertain in a way that didn't match his expensive suit. "I know I have no right to check on you. I know we barely know each other. But I couldn't stop thinking about you leaving the hospital alone after the kind of night that breaks people." Something in my chest cracked, because he was right. It had been the kind of night that broke people, and I was alone. I was always alone. Before I could stop myself, I started crying. Not pretty crying. Ugly, exhausted, soul-deep sobbing. Right there in the parking lot at 7 a.m., still in my scrubs, crying in front of a man I'd met once. He closed the distance between us in 3 steps. He didn't touch me. He just stood there, close enough that I could feel the solid presence of him, and waited until I could breathe again. "I'm sorry," I managed to say. I don't do this." "You don't have to apologize for being human," he said quietly. "Do you want to talk about it? Or do you want me to drive you home so you don't have to be alone right now?" I should have said no. Should have gotten in my car and left. But I was so tired. So tired of being strong, being alone, being fine. "Drive me home," I whispered. He opened the car door for me. The interior smelled like leather and something woodsy expensive. I gave him my address. If he was bothered by the neighborhood, he didn't show it. We drove in silence. When we pulled up to my building, he put the car in park but didn't turn it off. "Can I ask you something?" he said carefully. I nodded, too exhausted to be defensive. "The scar on your wrist. The crescent moon shape. How did you get it?" My heart stopped. That scar was tiny, barely visible. How had he noticed it? Why would he remember it? "I fell off a swing when I was a kid," I said slowly. Caught my arm on the chain. He closed his eyes like I'd just confirmed something he'd been desperate to know. When he opened them again, they were wet. His hands were shaking on the steering wheel. "I knew it," he whispered. "God, Lily, I knew it was you." Fear shot through me cold and sharp. "How do you know that name? Nobody calls me that." "I changed it 8 years ago, legally, completely. Nobody knows that name." My voice was rising, panic setting in. "How do you know that name?" I repeated. He turned to face me fully, and I could see he was barely holding himself together. His carefully constructed CEO facade was crumbling. "Because 18 years ago, I knew a girl named Lily Smith. She lived in the kitchen house on my family's estate outside Philadelphia. Her mother worked for my parents, and she was the kindest, bravest person I'd ever met. She was 10 years old, and she taught me that people mattered more than money, that friendship was more valuable than any inheritance." The world tilted sideways. I stared at him, my mind racing, trying to see the boy I'd known in the man sitting next to me. Trying to reconcile them. Alexander, Alex. Little Alex. Hayes, who'd sneak out of the main house to bring me books from his father's library. I spent the next week avoiding Emma's calls and throwing myself into work. Double shifts, triple shifts, anything to keep my mind busy. But I couldn't stop thinking about him. About little Alex, who'd shared his lunch with me when my mother couldn't afford to pack one. About teenage Alex, who'd cried when they sent him away. About adult Alexander, who'd spent nearly 2 decades searching. It was too much. It was too intense. I didn't know how to exist in a world where someone cared about me that much. On day 8, I collapsed during my shift. Just straight up fainted in the middle of the EA. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed with Emma standing over me looking furious and terrified. "Severe anemia," she said flatly. "Exhaustion. Malnutrition. When was the last time you ate a real meal?" Lily. I couldn't remember. Food was expensive. Rent was due. Student loans never stopped. I'd been surviving on coffee and whatever free food the hospital provided. Emma sat down hard in the chair next to my bed. "You're killing yourself. You work 70, 80-hour weeks. You never take care of yourself. And now I find out you've been skipping meals to save money. I'm fine, I started to say. You're not fine, she cut me off. And I'm tired of watching you destroy yourself because you think you don't deserve to be taken care of. I turned my face away. I don't need a lecture. No, you need a friend. You need someone to tell you that suffering alone isn't strength, it's just suffering. She left me alone after that. I stared at the ceiling of the hospital room, feeling pathetic and angry and so tired I could barely think. That's when Alexander walked in. He looked like he'd run there, his suit jacket gone, his tie loose, his hair a mess. He stopped in the doorway when he saw me, his face cycling through relief and fury and fear. Emma called me, he said quietly. She thought I should know. You shouldn't be here, I said, but my voice had no strength. He came to sit in the chair Emma had vacated. His hands were clenched on his knees, like he was physically restraining himself from touching me. When Emma told me you collapsed, that you've been working yourself to death, that you've been skipping meals because you can't afford food while also paying rent, I wanted to... His voice broke. I wanted to burn the whole world down. I don't need your pity, I said. This isn't pity, he said fiercely. This is rage. Rage that you've been suffering alone. Rage that the system is so broken you have to choose between eating and having a place to sleep. Rage that you think asking for help makes you weak. I'm not asking for your help, I shot back. I'm not your charity project. Is that what you think? He asked quietly. That I'm here because I want to rescue the poor girl and feel good about myself. Aren't you? I challenged. No, he said, and his voice was raw. I'm here because watching you hurt yourself kills me. I'm here because I spent 18 years wondering if you were okay, if you were safe, if you were happy. And now I've found you and you're not safe, you're not okay. And I don't know how to help you without making you hate me. I looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't the polished CEO from the restaurant. He was Alex, the boy who'd cried when they separated us, grown into a man who'd never stopped caring. I don't hate you, I said softly. I'm scared. Of me, he asked. Of this. Of you seeing how broken I am and realizing I'm not the girl you remember. He leaned forward, and his voice was gentle. You're not broken. You're surviving. There's a difference. Something in me cracked. All the walls I'd built, all the defense mechanisms, they crumbled. And I started talking. I told him everything. About my mother dying. About changing my name because I couldn't bear to be connected to a past that only meant pain. About working myself to death because stopping meant thinking and thinking meant feeling and feeling meant remembering I was completely alone. He listened to all of it, never interrupting, never judging, just listening. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'm going to say something and I need you to hear me without running. Okay. I nodded, too drained to fight. I want to help you, he said. Not because I think you're weak. Not because I'm trying to buy your affection. But because I have the resources to make your life easier and it physically hurts me not to use them. Let me pay off your student loans. Let me cover your rent for 6 months so you can work fewer shifts and actually eat. Let me do this not as some billionaire savior, but as someone who cares about you and wants you to stop suffering. I should say no, I said. But you're not going to, he said, reading me perfectly. Because you're exhausted and you're scared and deep down you know you can't keep doing this alone. He was right. I was tired of being strong, tired of surviving, tired of being alone. Okay, I whispered. Okay. He let out a breath like he'd been holding it for years. Thank you, he said. Thank you for trusting me. But I have conditions, I added. This doesn't mean we're together. This doesn't mean I owe you anything. And if I start feeling like charity, I walk. He nodded immediately. Whatever you need. 3 days later, I was discharged from the hospital. Alexander insisted on driving me home. When we got to my building, he parked but didn't turn off the car. Come with me, he said suddenly. There's something I want to show you. Where? I asked. It's a surprise. Trust me. Against every instinct of self-preservation, I did. We drove out of the city into the Philadelphia suburbs. The neighborhoods got nicer, the houses bigger. My stomach started to knot with anxiety. We're not going to your family's estate, I said flatly. No, he said. We're going somewhere else. We pulled up to a small park. It looked old, the equipment worn but maintained. And in the center was a swing set. My breath caught. I knew this swing set. This was where I'd fallen, where I'd gotten the scar on my wrist. This was the park near the kitchen house where my mother and I had lived. You restored this place, I said, my voice breaking. The park had been condemned when we'd lived here. Rusty equipment, overgrown grass. Now it was beautiful. I bought the land when I was 25, he said quietly. The city was going to tear it down. I restored it. I couldn't save the kitchen house. My father demolished that before I could stop him. But I could save this. He got out of the car and I followed, walking across the grass toward the swings. Everything looked the same but different, preserved and improved but still recognizable. This is where you taught me to pump my legs, he said, standing next to the swing. This is where we'd spend hours just talking. This is where I realized that the world outside my family's walls was bigger and more real than anything inside them. I sat down on the swing, the metal chain cool under my hands. You remembered all this. I remembered everything, he said. Every conversation, every moment. You were the most important person in my world for those 2 years we knew each other. And then you were gone and I had no way to find you and it felt like losing gravity. He sat on the swing next to mine. We swung gently, side by side, and for a moment I was 10 years old again, laughing with my best friend in the whole world. Why didn't you forget me? I asked. You were a kid. Kids move on. Some kids do, he said. But I knew even then that what we had mattered. You were the first person to treat me like I was more than my last name. Do you know how rare that is? I stopped swinging and looked at him. His face was open, vulnerable, nothing like the polished CEO from our first date. My parents found out we were friends, he continued. They told me that spending time with the help was inappropriate, that I was embarrassing the family. They sent you and your mother away. I tried to fight it. I was 10 years old and I tried to fight it. But they sent me to boarding school in Switzerland and by the time I came back, you were gone. I didn't know, I said. I thought we just had to move because my mom lost her job. She lost her job because of me, he said, and the guilt in his voice was crushing. Because I couldn't stay away from you. Because I made them notice you. That's not your fault, I said fiercely. You were a child. They were adults who punished a kid for being friends with someone they deemed beneath him. He looked at me with so much gratitude it hurt. I've spent years trying to forgive them. I can't. I cut them off as soon as I had control of my trust fund. Built my own company, my own life. Everything I have, I built it so I'd never be powerless again. So if I found you, I could help you. You built an empire to find me, I said softly. I built an empire so that when I found you, I could give you the world, he corrected. I didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to process a love that had lasted 18 years on childhood memories alone. We sat on those swings as the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about boarding school, about business school, about building his company from nothing because he refused to use his family's name. I told him about nursing school, about the patients who stayed with me, about the exhaustion that felt like drowning. And slowly, carefully, the walls between us started to come down. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a rhythm. He'd pick me up after shifts and we'd drive around Philadelphia, talking until sunrise. He never pushed for more, never assumed, just gave me space to figure out what I wanted. He paid off my student loans without asking. I found out when I got a notification that my balance was zero. I called him furious and he just said, "Too late to take it back now." He convinced me to cut back to 40 hours a week. He didn't offer me money directly, but suddenly my rent was paid through my property management company, and when I confronted them, they said an anonymous benefactor had set up a trust. I knew it was him. I was too relieved to fight it. I started eating regularly, sleeping more than 4 hours a night. My body slowly stopped feeling like it was shutting down. And I started to see him not as Alexander Hayes the billionaire, but as Alex, my friend who'd grown up into someone extraordinary. We were having coffee one afternoon when his phone rang. He glanced at it and his whole body tensed. He declined the call, but I'd seen the name on the screen. "Father, you still talk to them?" I asked carefully. "No," he said flatly. "But they call. Usually when they want something." "Do they know about me?" I asked. "That you found me." He was quiet for a long moment. "They know I'm seeing someone. They don't know it's you. And they never will because I don't subject people I care about to them." "What would they do if they knew?" I pressed. He looked at me with something dark in his eyes. "They'd try to pay you to leave. They'd tell you I was delusional, that I was fixated on a childhood memory that didn't mean what I thought it meant. They'd make you feel small and worthless because that's what they do to anyone who threatens their control." "I won't let them hurt you again," I said. He smiled, sad and grateful. "I know. But they can't hurt me anymore either. I'm not 10 years old. I'm not powerless. And I chose you then and I'm choosing you now." Something shifted between us in that moment. The past and present merged. We weren't children anymore, but the connection we'd had was still there, stronger for having survived 18 years apart. That night, he drove me home and walked me to my door. We stood in the hallway of my apartment building, under flickering fluorescent lights that made everything look dingy and sad. The walls were yellowed with age, marked with graffiti someone had tried to paint over. It smelled like old cooking and mildew. "I need to tell you something," I said before I could lose my nerve, before I could retreat back behind my walls. He waited, patient as always. His hands were in his pockets, his posture careful, giving me space but staying close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. "I'm terrified," I admitted, and my voice cracked on the word. "I'm terrified that this is too good to be true. That I'm going to wake up and realize it was all in my head. That you're going to realize I'm not the girl you remember. That I'm broken and bitter and so tired, and you're going to leave." Everyone leaves eventually. My hands were shaking. I crossed my arms to hide it. And I'm terrified that I'm going to let myself believe this could be real. That someone could actually care about me this much and then lose it. Lose you. And I don't think I could survive that. I barely survived the first time. He stepped closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to look at him. "Can I touch you?" he asked quietly, his voice rough with emotion. I nodded. He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and cupped my face in his hands. His touch was gentle, reverent, like I was something precious that might break. His thumbs brushed away tears I hadn't realized were falling. "You are exactly the girl I remember," he said, his voice fierce and certain. "Brave and kind and so much stronger than you think you are. But you're also more than that memory. You're the woman who survived things that would have broken most people. You're the nurse who saves lives every day. You're the person who fought her way through nursing school while working night shifts. You're my friend who grew up into someone I'm in awe of. But I'm also damaged," I whispered. "I'm also angry and scared, and I don't know how to let people in. I don't know how to be loved." "Then we'll figure it out together," he said simply. "Because I'm scared too. I'm scared I'll mess this up. That I'll move too fast or say the wrong thing or make you feel trapped. That my money will always be a barrier between us. That you'll never be able to see me as anything other than the rich kid whose family destroyed your life, but I'm more scared of not trying. I spent 18 years without you. I don't want to spend another day pretending I don't love you." My breath caught. "Love. I've loved you since I was 10 years old," he said simply. "I never stopped. I know that sounds insane. I know you need time to figure out what you feel. I'm not asking you to say it back. I just need you to know that you're not alone in this. You never have to be alone again." I kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't smooth. I just leaned forward and pressed my lips to his and felt the entire world shift. He kissed me back like I was oxygen, like I was everything. His hands stayed gentle on my face, never demanding more than I was willing to give. When we broke apart, I was crying. Happy tears this time. "I don't know if I love you yet," I said honestly. "But I think I'm starting to. And that terrifies me more than anything." He smiled, and it was the smile of the boy I'd known, joyful and unguarded. "That's enough," he said. "That's more than enough." We took it slow after that. He didn't push for more physically, didn't assume we were suddenly in a relationship. We just kept spending time together, learning each other as adults. But something had changed. The walls were down. We were figuring this out together. 2 months after our first date, Emma cornered me at work with a knowing smile. "So," she said, "you and Alexander." I tried to downplay it. "We're taking things slow." "Lily," she said seriously, "I've known you for 5 years. I've never seen you this happy. Don't sabotage this because you're scared." "I'm not sabotaging," I protested. "You're already looking for reasons why it won't work," she said. "I can see it in your face. Stop. Just for once, let yourself have something good." She was right. I was already preparing for the end, already building walls again just in case. That night, I called Alexander. "Come over," I said. He was at my door in 20 minutes, looking worried. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. "Nothing's wrong," I said. I need to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. I need to stop assuming this will end. So I'm telling you now, I'm in..." I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. His face transformed. He picked me up and spun me around right there in my tiny apartment, laughing like he'd just won the lottery. We spent that night talking about the future, about what we wanted, what we were afraid of, what we needed from each other. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense. It was real, honest, sometimes painful. But it was ours. 6 months later, I moved into his penthouse apartment in downtown Philadelphia. Not because he pushed me, but because I wanted to. Because waking up next to him felt like coming home. I kept working at the hospital. He never asked me to quit, never suggested I should do something else. He supported my career the same way I supported his. We visited the park regularly. Sometimes we'd swing like kids. Sometimes we'd just sit and remember. It became our place, the physical representation of how we'd found our way back to each other. 1 year after our first date, Alexander took me back to that park at sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the kind of beautiful that makes you believe in fresh starts. We sat on the swings side by side, the chains creaking gently with our weight. He'd been quiet during the drive, nervous in a way I rarely saw him. His hands had been tight on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched like he was preparing for something important. Now, as we swung gently back and forth, he pulled out a small velvet box from his pocket. "I'm not asking you to marry me," he said quickly, seeing my eyes widen in panic. "Not yet. I know you need more time. I know we're still figuring this out. But I want you to have this anyway." He opened the box to reveal a delicate necklace. The pendant was a tiny crescent moon, crafted in silver, the same exact shape as my scar. It was beautiful and simple and so personal it made my throat tight. "So you remember," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "that some marks aren't wounds. Some marks are proof that we survived, proof that we fell and got back up. And some people, the rare ones, the ones worth everything, are worth searching for your entire life, worth 18 years of not giving up, worth building an empire just to have the power to help them, worth every moment of fear that I'd never find you again." He reached out and gently fastened the necklace around my neck. His fingers brushed my skin and I shivered. The pendant settled right over my heart. "I love you," he said, looking into my eyes. "I've loved you since I was 8 years old and you shared your lunch with me even though you barely had enough. I loved you when I was 10 and they took you away and I couldn't stop them. I loved you through every year of searching, every dead end, every moment I thought I'd never see you again. And I love you now, as you are, with all your walls and fears and strength." I kissed him as the sun set behind us, the park glowing golden around us. Right there on the swings where we'd met as children, where he'd restored everything for me, where our story had really begun 20 years ago. "I love you too," I whispered against his lips. "I'm still scared, but I love you too." We weren't perfect. We had hard days, arguments, moments where our different backgrounds caused friction. But we worked through them. We chose each other every day. 2 years after our first date, he proposed for real. We were back at the park, the same swings where we'd met as children, where he'd taken me a year earlier to give me the necklace. It was early evening, that golden hour when everything looks soft and possible. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange and purple that looked almost unreal. He'd been nervous all day, fumbling with his phone, starting sentences and not finishing them. I'd pretended not to notice, giving him space to work up to whatever he needed to say. We sat on the swings, the metal chains creaking gently as we rocked back and forth. The park was empty except for us, deliberately so I'd realize later. He'd probably paid someone to make sure we had privacy. Lily, he started, then stopped. Took a breath, started again. I've been practicing this speech for months, he said, and suddenly there was a vulnerability in his voice I'd rarely heard. I had a whole thing planned. Eloquent and romantic and perfect. But now that we're here, all I can think about is that day when we were 10 years old, and my parents told me I couldn't see you anymore. His voice cracked on the memory. I remember standing in my room, watching from the window as you and your mother packed your things. You were crying. Your mother was trying to be strong for you, and I was powerless. I was 10 years old and I couldn't do anything to stop it. I couldn't protect you. I couldn't even say goodbye. He stopped swinging, turned to look at me fully. His eyes were wet. I promised myself that day that if I ever found you again, I'd never let you go. I'd never be powerless again. I'd build a life where I could protect the people I love. He slid off the swing and dropped to one knee right there in the wood chips and dirt. Pulled out a small velvet box from his pocket. I spent 18 years searching for you, he said. 18 years wondering if you were okay, if you were safe, if you'd remember me. And then I found you, and you were exhausted and guarded and so much stronger than I'd imagined. You'd survived things that would have destroyed most people. You'd built a life for yourself despite every obstacle the world threw at you. He opened the box. The ring inside was simple, elegant, a single diamond set in a delicate band. Not ostentatious, not trying to prove anything, just beautiful. I don't want to rescue you, he said. You don't need rescuing. You're the strongest person I know, but I do want to stand beside you. I want to be the person you come home to after the hard shifts. I want to make sure you never skip another meal. I want to grow old with you and sit on these swings when we're 70 and remember the children we were. His voice was shaking now, the words tumbling out faster. I want to have kids with you who never have to choose between food and rent. I want to build a life where we both feel safe, where we both feel seen, where neither of us ever has to be alone again. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. Lily Smith, Lily Morgan, whatever name you choose to go by, you're the love of my life. You have been since I was 8 years old. Will you marry me? I was crying too, had been since he dropped to his knee. I slid off my swing and knelt in front of him, taking his face in my hands. Yes, I said. Yes, I'll marry you. I'll marry you and argue with you and let you pay off my loans and drive me home after night shifts. I'll marry you and have babies with you and grow old with you. Yes. He kissed me there in the dirt, under the swings where we'd met 20 years ago. The ring was forgotten for a moment, still in the box, as we held each other and cried and laughed. When we finally broke apart, he slid the ring onto my finger with shaking hands. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. He'd probably measured my finger while I was sleeping, the same way he'd learned all my tells. Memorized my schedule, cataloged every tiny detail about me over the past 2 years. The sky had gone dark while we were lost in each other. Stars were coming out, competing with the city lights. He pulled me to my feet and we swung together, side by side, his hand holding mine. I never stopped looking for you, he said quietly. Even when the investigators said you were impossible to find. Even when everyone told me to move on, I never stopped. Because some people are worth searching for your entire life. I squeezed his hand. I'm glad you never stopped. I'm glad Emma set up that blind date. I'm glad I showed up looking terrible because I wanted you to leave me alone. He laughed, the sound full and joyful. Best decision you ever made. That terrible outfit. That don't want to be here attitude. Walking into that restaurant ready to scare me off. And then I saw you and my heart stopped because after 18 years, there you were. We should probably go tell Emma, I said. She's going to cry. She's going to say I told you so. He corrected. She's been telling me for months to just propose already. You asked Emma for permission. I teased. I asked Emma what you'd want, he said seriously. Because making you happy is more important than any surprise. And she told me you'd want it here at this park, where everything started. He was right. This was perfect. No fancy restaurant, no public spectacle, no pressure. Just us and the swings and the memories of two children who'd found each other against all odds. I never changed my name back to Smith. I stayed Lily Morgan. But I wasn't hiding anymore. I was just being the person I'd become. The person who'd survived everything and came out stronger. And Alexander, he became more than the CEO, more than the billionaire, more than the boy who'd never forgotten me. He became my partner, my home, my proof that love could survive 18 years of searching. Some people might say it's not realistic, that childhood love doesn't last, that class differences are too hard to overcome, that I should have been more resistant, more skeptical, more careful. But those people have never known what it feels like to be truly seen. To have someone look past your clothes, your exhaustion, your walls, and recognize the person underneath. They've never known what it means to be searched for, to matter enough to someone that they spent 18 years looking. The truth is, love doesn't always make sense. Sometimes it's messy and complicated and scary. Sometimes it shows up when you're wearing scrub pants and no makeup, in a restaurant you can't afford, across the table from someone who refuses to let you disappear again. And sometimes, the person you need most is the one you've known all along. You just both needed time to grow into the people who could finally choose each other. The end. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If it reached your heart, even just a little, do not leave without letting me know. A simple heart in the comments is enough. And if you want to feel more stories like this, stories about love that survives time and distance, about connections that refuse to break no matter how hard life tries to sever them, make sure to subscribe to Dramora Stories. Every story here is a reminder that some people are worth searching for your entire life, and that being truly seen by the right person can heal wounds you didn't even know you were carrying. And maybe that is true for you too.